Welcome to Chapter 3, Lesson 3, and Lesson 3 of Chapter 3 is on subtracting integers. Okay, so your learning target today is I know how to subtract integers. And subtracting integers honestly isn't very different from adding integers. It just adds one little extra step. And so before we get going on that train, we're going to first define what the additive inverse is. Okay, so an additive inverse is what you would add to a number to make it 0. Okay, so let's give a few examples for this. If we had the number 5, what would we need to add to that to make it 0? Well, that's pretty simple, right? If we have a positive 5 and we want to make it 0, we'd have to add a negative 5, right? And that would equal 0 because the positive cancels out the negative and we're just left with 0, okay? And in the same way, if we had a negative 2, we would have to add a positive 2 to that in order to make it 0, okay? And so what an additive inverse is it's just whatever you would add to a number to make it 0. I have 5. To make it 0, I'd have to add a negative 5. I have negative 2. To make it 0, I'd have to add a positive 2. And that'll equal 0, okay? So that is what an additive inverse is. So let's move on to our key concept here. How do we subtract integers really? Okay, so to subtract integers, we have to change the subtraction problem to an addition problem. Okay, so this is the first step. We have to change the subtraction problem to an addition problem. And the way that we do that is by adding by the subtracted numbers additive inverse. Okay, so I know those words right there can kind of just be confusing, but let's just take it a step at a time. If we have the problem 3 minus 2, okay, this is pretty easy. We all know what 3 minus 2 is. We know that 3 minus 2 equals 1. But if we want to change that problem, which we will need to be doing for some of these more difficult problems, is we have to add by the subtracted numbers additive inverse. So we're going to change this to an addition problem, we're going to take 3 and we're going to add by the subtracted numbers. So we're subtracting by 2. We have to take it by the subtracted numbers additive inverse. And to make 2 the additive inverse of 2 is just a negative 2, right? 2 plus a negative 2 will give us 0. So 3 plus a negative 2. Okay. And if we do that, just based on what we know from adding integers that we did yesterday, if we're adding integers with different signs, we have to take the absolute value of both numbers. Sorry, that looks like an addition. So the absolute value of 3, and we have to subtract by the absolute value of negative 2. Okay, and remember the rule is that if the positive number is greater than the negative number, which the absolute value it'll show to be, then the answer will be positive. Okay, so the absolute value of 3 is 3, and we have to subtract the absolute value of negative 2 is positive 2, and we end up getting 1. Okay, so it's the same exact way to put it. It's the same exact answer that we're going to end up getting, but we need to know how to write subtraction problems as addition problems. So let's do problem number 1. And problem number 1 says that we need to find what 5 minus 7 is. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do, we have a subtraction problem. We need to change this to an addition problem. So we're going to take 5 and we're going to add by the additive inverse of 7, which is a negative 7. Okay, 5 plus a negative 7. Okay, and so before I go on to actually doing the step that we did up here, you know, where we actually solved this type of problem, I do not like that I'm going to end up having to subtract 5 minus 7 again. I want to switch these around, and because of the addition, the commutative property of addition, we can switch these two numbers around because it doesn't matter which way we add. So I'm going to change this to negative 7 plus 5. Okay, it's the same exact thing. We're going to get the same exact answer. It doesn't matter which one we add and in what order. Okay, so we're going to take our negative 7 and we have to add a positive 5. Okay, and so to do this, we have different signs. We're adding integers with different signs. So we have to find the absolute value of negative 7 and subtract out the absolute value of 5. And we know that our answer is going to be a negative answer. And the reason we know that is because when we take the absolute value of negative 7, that's 7. And the absolute value of 5 is 5. 7, where we took from the negative, is larger than 5, which means that our answer will be negative. And 7 minus 5 equals 2, which means that 5 minus 7 equals a negative 2. Okay? Pretty simple there. Okay? So let's go on to example 2 now. Example 2 is a lot easier. We have finding negative 8. And we have to change this to an addition statement. So negative 8 plus the additive inverse of 4 is negative 4. So we have negative 8 plus a negative 4. And what we see is we're adding integers that have the same sign. And to do that, we just have to add the two numbers together, 8 plus 4, which we know is going to equal 12. And then we have to know that because these are negative, this number is going to stay negative. Okay, and so negative 8 plus a negative 4 equals a negative 12. All right, example 3 is we need to find 13 minus a negative 7. So I'm going to rewrite this as an addition statement. We have 13 plus the additive inverse of negative 7 is a positive 7. Okay, and then this one is super easy. We know how to add 13 plus 7. That's what we've been doing since we were little. And 13 plus 7 is just 20. Okay, so that's probably the easiest type of problem when we're subtracting integers, is when we end up making that both of them are positive. Okay, so 13 plus 7 equals 20. All right, last example. Example number 4. We need to find what negative 15 minus a negative 12 is. Okay, so I'm going to write this as an addition statement. So I'm going to have negative 15, and we're going to add the additive inverse of negative 12, which is a positive 12. Okay, negative 15 plus 12. Okay, so we know that we need to find the absolute value because we're adding integers with different signs. We need to find the absolute value of both. We have the absolute value of negative 15 plus the absolute value of 12. Okay, and when we can tell right now our answer is going to be negative, and the reason why we know that is that absolute value of negative 15 is much larger than the absolute value of 12 by a total of 3. Okay, so if we take the absolute value of 15, and sorry, this is actually supposed to be subtracting here. I messed that up. The absolute value of 15 minus the absolute value of 12, which is just 12. So we're left with 15 minus 12, and we end up getting 3. We know our answer is going to be negative 3 once again. So that's how we do this. It makes us really happy that we have known how to do this. It makes us actually extremely happy, and even maybe a triple happy. We're happy.